The funny thing about fate and destiny is that sometimes it's just a very small thing that changes your direction. And that's really what happened for me, because I just had extra space and I said to the kids, hey, what's your favorite food?
Today's guest research focus shifted from psychological to nutritional neuroscience upon discovering nutrition's critical role in mental well-being while completing a master's in psychology. She's a regular featured expert in the media, and her 2 books are available in 4 languages. Using her background in psychology, combined with evidence-based nutritional neuroscience and neurological strategies, she supports behavior change and stress resilience within corporates and for individuals who want to optimize their brain health. This can be done via online courses, workshops, and tailored events internationally. Welcome to the show, Delia. How are you doing?
I'm well, Toby. Thank you very much. Oh, my goodness, that's a long introduction.
I was like, oh yeah, I have to just read everything now because you've done so much work as in with, with food, with nutrition, with brain health, and I think you deserve that long introduction. Thank you so much
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Mirror Talk. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate, the way we were able to, organize all of this and make it happen at the end. I'm so excited to be speaking with you right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Toby. As we said earlier, you in your midnight and I'm in your tomorrow. So you've made a big effort. Thank you as well.
Thank you. So please, I would love us to, start out with your life and your career journey so far. That I find very fascinating, from your master's to your PhD. What was the motivation behind that? What made you study clinical psychology and then later switching to neuroscience?
It's a good question. And actually, I was talking to somebody about it yesterday. What makes people study psychology? And the person said to me, oh, people that study psychology are always funny in the head. And I said, that's not true. I said, people study psychology for lots of different reasons. Yeah. And I think for me, I was curious about what made people do what they do. That's one of the things. And my childhood kind of like led me to do that. So I was busy trying to find out why children were underachieving at school. The kids where the teacher says and the parents say, this child should be doing so well at school, and they're just not. And so I was looking at the psychological variables that underpinned underachievement. And I was looking at how to help these children become motivated and study more and all of the normal, boring things that people do. Yeah. But then I had a little bit of extra space on one of my questionnaires. And, the funny thing about fate and destiny is that sometimes it's just a very small thing that changes your direction. And that's really what happened for me, because I just had extra space and I said to the kids, hey, what's your favorite food? Yeah. And all the children that should have been doing really well but weren't loved junk food. Yeah. And all the kids that were not doing poorly, that's the control group, the smart kids who were doing well, they didn't love junk food. It was like Sunday roast and roast chicken and whatever. And it was like, this is a big difference. You don't often see this in research. And once again, fate stepped in because I was pregnant with my first child. And I thought, I'm going to take a little bit of time. I'm going to have my child and then I'm going to investigate this. Is it really true that what we eat can affect our mood and can affect how we think and can affect our motivation? Yeah. And Toby, the rest, is history, because that was like 25, 26 years ago. And now I know for sure, and all the science supports the fact that what we eat directly impacts the brain. But when I started, it was really early days. So there wasn't any information about this. I used to go to the library and I used to search through journal articles and find books and find maybe one sentence, maybe one small paragraph. And then I would have to track that researcher down wherever they were in the world. And I had to say, what's happening? And it was a long, long process. But I eventually realized, and then I found my own, group of people that I could work with and talk to, and it became really clear. So we know that it takes about 17 years for research to find its way to the man and woman on the street. And it's a very long time. But I think that it's speeding up now because technology is helping us get that information out there. So that's the answer to my first part of the story. But the second part, where I decided to look at stress with my PhD, was because I was a mother and I felt stressed. And I looked at all these mothers around me and I thought, they're also stressed, and they were buying supplements, and using magnesium and taking all these things over the counter to feel better. And I thought, do they really work? What's underlying this? And then I had another journey because I went to quite a few universities, 4 universities, in fact. And I said, look, this is what I want to do. And they said, oh, no, you need to have a degree in nutrition, or you need to be a neurologist. And I said, no, I'm a psychologist. And I want to look at the role of nutrition and the brain. And they said, no, you can't do that. There's too many disciplines. So eventually I found Adelaide Medical School, and they said, oh, we love interdisciplinary research. We love this because we can translate this into real action where people can use it. And so I started that journey, and that's where I am today after my PhD. I really understand how we can't separate our neurology and our psychology and our nutrition. We have to put those 3 things together. And when we do that, we can live our best life. So that's the answer to how I got to be right here.
Yeah, that's so awesome. It's incredible what you do, as in, combining neuroscience with psychology. That's so awesome. That's so, brilliant, I would say. And I'd love you to educate me on that today. Like, I would love you to educate me on, the brain's requirement for an optimal well-being. And, what can we eat? Earlier you're talking about the case studies that you had, like the very brilliant students that are doing well in school that don't like junk food, and the ones that were not doing so well enjoy junk food, for example. So how does what we eat directly affect our brain's function?
It's a good question, and it's a complex answer, but I'll make it really simple. Firstly, the way the brain functions depends on its structure. And the structure depends on what we eat, because, for example, just the first thing that I had to discover and that I share with people is that 60% of the dry weight of the brain is fat. So that means if you had to take a brain and take out all the water, what you would be left with, the 60% would be fat. And people go, oh, wow, that's amazing. So that means that from the food we eat, some of it gets converted into fat. But of that 60%, between 20 and 25% needs to be made of a very specific kind of fat, which we call polyunsaturated fats. And that's omega-3 and omega-6. And they are critically important because they help the brain structure be very flexible and very malleable. So that means it can respond very quickly to input from the outside world, from the environment. It can respond, and it also responds quickly from what's going on in the body. So that's the structure. Now, apart from that, it needs energy. And the brain's preferred source of energy is carbohydrates. We can use fat if we don't have carbohydrates, but it prefers carbohydrates because it's a lot easier to use carbohydrates. And that's a little bit of complexity, but let's just take the carb conversation for now. So when we have enough carbohydrates, the brain can now make energy in the mitochondria within the cells. If we don't have enough carbohydrates, the brain runs on empty. And that's a problem because we've got nowhere to store energy in the brain. It's too small. Yes. We can store energy on the body. We all know that we can get fat, and that's stored energy. But in the brain, there's no place to store energy. So if we don't have enough carbohydrates, then people get, for example, irritable, what we call cranky. They, the other word is hangry. They're hungry and they're angry, so they become aggressive. They don't think clearly. And that's because the brain is saying, hey, I need food. There's no food. There's no storage here. I need it. The other thing that comes with carbohydrates are the nutrients that are required for the neurotransmitters to be created. And we also get that from protein. So the neurotransmitters need to be in the brain so that the cells can communicate with each other. And then when they communicate, they can say things like, the external world is telling me to do X, like wake up in the morning or exercise or whatever it is. And the neurotransmitters can take that information and translate it into action within the brain. So that's basically the role of fats and carbohydrates and protein. And when people restrict any of those things and their digestion is impacted, it means that the brain is directly impacted, because that means the structure isn't correct. So the brain isn't flexible. It doesn't have the right kinds of fat. It doesn't have the glucose to keep the energy high and maintain mood and keep our focus and concentration good, which leads to learning. Because if you can't focus and concentrate, you can't learn. And then, of course, you need the neurotransmitters for that as well. So they all work together in a beautiful symphony when we're eating enough of the right food for the brain. Because, Toby, what a lot of people don't realize is that the brain is the greediest organ that we own. It uses upwards of 20% of the carbohydrates that we consume, 20%, and it's only 2% of the body weight. So you can see how greedy it is.
Yes.
And it wants a lot of energy, and it needs it 24/7. It doesn't only need it while we're awake, because while we're asleep, it's also busy doing things.
Yeah.
The other challenge that a lot of people don't realize is that the most sophisticated part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, uses 20% of that 20%. So it is the greediest part of the brain in terms of the whole brain.
Yes.
And when people are not eating well and they don't have enough of the right nutrients, the prefrontal cortex can't work properly. And that's a real challenge, because that's the part of the brain that's the CEO of the brain. It is the part of the brain that allows us to make decisions based on previous knowledge. It allows us to think about the future. It allows us to detect patterns. It allows us to be creative using our skills and our knowledge. It allows us to think about what future consequences will be of the behavior or the decision we're making now. So when it doesn't have enough nutrients, we basically revert back to being very much more simple and knee-jerk reaction people. We lose that higher capacity to think clearly, creatively, innovatively. And that's what I suggest to people when they feel like they're not creative. I say, well, let's have a look and see if your brain is running on empty. So that's the short answer for what the brain needs.
Yes.
Within that, of course, omega-3 and omega-6 are specific fats. Protein, people argue about whether meat is better than legumes. And then carbohydrates, we know that when people are eating highly refined carbohydrates, as you said, the junk food, we know that there are a number of problems with that, because it's firstly deficient in the nutrients like the B vitamins, the magnesium, the zinc, the iron, all of those nutrients. And it's also doesn't have fiber. And when we don't have fiber, our gut is impacted. And the minute your gut is impacted, it impacts the brain as well. So there are subcategories within the answer that I've just given you.
Wow. And earlier you were talking about, the ladies with their supplements, for example. Like, can you tell me about supplements and, how they have, what are the effects on the brain, for example? Are they good for the brain, or should we avoid them and just eat, natural sources of, food and nutrients?
It's a good question, and it's hard again to answer. When I went and did a systematic review and I looked at all the research on dietary supplements for stress specifically. So I looked at things like magnesium, B vitamins, zinc, and so on. I came away only with 14 papers, only 14 papers that fit the criteria that were robust and solid evidence. So even within that, there was not a lot of proof that these dietary supplements work. So by 2025, the dietary supplement industry for stress management alone, that's just stress management dietary supplements, is going to be worth over $16 billion.
Wow.
So that's a lot of money. So when you look at that, you realize that people are buying a lot of hope and a lot of hype, but they may not be buying solid science. There are definitely some nutrients that you can use. And for example, specific forms of magnesium can be helpful. Some forms of zinc can be helpful. Vitamin C, some forms can also be helpful for stress management. But a lot of the stuff that's out there is actually not effective in the formulation or in the quantity that people are buying. And so I always suggest to people, you start with the best diet you possibly can find and afford, the best diet. And on top of that, you use very select nutrients if you need them. And the best way to find out whether you need them is to do a blood test with a functional practitioner, because they can see whether you have enough or not. And even then, sometimes those tests don't tell you exactly. I look at people's behavior and how they're sleeping and how they're feeling generally and their energy levels. That often tells you a lot more about what they're deficient in, because you look at their life and you look at how they feel and you look at their, their thought patterns. There are all these things to bring into the discussion. Yes. And then you can make a decision. So once again, I'm sorry, it's not a simple answer, but that's what we know for sure now. Yes.
And one thing that is totally new to me that I've learned today is that 20% of what we eat is being required by the brain, to function, and 20% of the 20% is required by the CEO of the brain to to perform its function throughout the our life cycle. Like when we're sleeping, when we're awake, anytime it needs 20% of the 20% of what the brain needs to function all the time. So now I'm so inspired to want to feed my brain with the best quality of food ever. So is there like an amount of carbohydrate that we are required to eat every day so that the brain can get enough 20% out of it to function? Or are there like amount of nutrients that we're supposed to eat that's advisable, recommendable by the health nutritionalist?
Okay, once again, it's a little bit complicated to answer. I feel like every question is a complex one to answer, but this is actually quite a simple one to answer. The most important thing to keep in mind is we need to eat enough to keep us healthy, to keep us full of energy, and to keep our weight stable. So, when people ask me about carbohydrates, I say you eat enough so that you don't start carrying them around as energy storage. Yes. So the minute people are overweight, they're either eating too much of the right carbs or too much of the bad carbs. And generally, well, I can probably say 99.9% of the time, they're eating of the bad carbs, because those are the ones that don't satisfy us. When we eat the right kinds of carbs that are full of fiber, they're full of nutrients, our brain registers that we're full before we overeat. And that's great, because that's a natural inbuilt mechanism for stopping us from eating too much. And then we stop eating and we don't carry, excess storage on our body. And then we can live a happy life. So I suggest the person that, like a young man, for example, who's out and about, he's very physically active, he goes to the gym, he, doesn't sit on the couch watching Netflix all day, he's out and about living his life, he will need a lot more carbs than the person who sits at their desk all day, doesn't do any exercise. That person isn't healthily minded in any case. So we have to look at our lifestyle, and that will tell us how many of the carbs we need. And if we're eating the right kinds of carbs, we're also getting a whole lot of other nutrients with the carbs. So then we don't have to worry about missing out on them. And then as far as protein goes, there's lots of different theories about, which protein is best. Some people believe that you have to have animal protein. There are lots of people who have lived very healthy lives in many different cultures that have only eaten plant forms of protein. Yeah. So that can also be a solution for people who don't want to eat animal flesh. And then, of course, as far as the fats go, you need more fat than you think you do if you're very physically active, because the body can also use those fats as a form of fuel to give you energy. But the omega-3 and the omega-6 are different. You need them on top of everything else that you're eating, because the body needs them for so many different functions, including the brain. So I suggest to people that they eat a lot of nuts and seeds, specifically seeds like hemp seeds, seeds like flax seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds. They crush them up and they eat them. And when people go to my website and they opt into my newsletter and email list, I send them a gift that has got a supplement inside that gives you the perfect ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So if anyone wants to know what I use, they can do that. And I don't sell it and I don't get any money for it. I've just been using it since I discovered it, because it's the best one in the world. I can't find a better one. And it's a perfect ratio, Toby, between omega-3 and omega-6. Yes. And it's also produced in an environment where the fats don't become damaged, because that's the other secret about these omega-3 and omega-6 fats. They get damaged very easily by light, heat, and oxygen, because they're very delicate and their biochemical makeup makes them very susceptible to damage from those elements. And they're very sensitive and sophisticated because of the job they do in the brain, because of their double bonds. So without getting into biochemistry, listeners can just know that they're very delicate. So just buying them off the shelf from any old person doesn't work. You have to really be sure you're consuming the right kind. So once again, that's a long explanation, but I think it's nice to know that you can judge for yourself. You don't have to follow a scale and weigh everything. We weren't born to do that. We can know how we feel. If we've got lots of energy, we're not putting on weight, we can think clearly, we sleep well, our gut works well. All of those things mean that we're doing it right. And that's why I wrote my books, to make it easy for people to start doing that, and then listening to themselves, listening to their body, listening to how they feel. Because ultimately that's the best way to live your best life. You can't follow a set of rules forever. You need to, embody the knowledge that someone else has taken a lot of time to find out, and use it and start feeling it. So that's the long answer, Toby.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful answer. I'm going to place the link to your website in the show notes for this episode. It is lighterbrighteryou.life. It will be
That's
in the show notes of this episode, and anyone can, subscribe to the newsletter and get this supplement, or get this newsletter and information about the nutrients that one could take use of.
Yes, and then I've also put some recipes in there. So for 3 days, if they follow those recipes, they'll start feeling better. They'll start saying, wow, I feel lighter and I feel brighter, because everybody wants to feel their best. People want to feel like they've got a lot of energy. We don't want to feel like we're carrying all these burdens, and our body can feel like a burden. And someone asked me a question a while ago, and it was a funny question, but it was a good answer. And I'll give you the answer here, because this is how I would like everybody to feel, that you don't feel your body. That you don't have aches and pains, that you don't wake up and go, oh, I'm sore. Oh, I can't walk up the stairs. Oh, I don't have energy. We want to feel so good that our body just becomes something that we take with us. It's not something that holds us back. And when it's not operating optimally and our brain isn't being fed optimally, we don't feel good physically. So I want people to just not feel their body, but in the best possible way, in a healthy way.
Yes, that's good. And that's why I love us to talk about your book right now. Your first book is titled Feed Your Brain, 7 Steps to a Lighter, Brighter You. Yes, I love us to talk about that. Yes. So can you, explain, the science, because this book talks about the science behind nutrition and brain health. So can you tell me more about your book and the science that was explained in the book?
Absolutely, Toby. I put the book into 7 steps because 7 steps are easy for people to understand and, run with an action. So that's why the 7 steps are in there. But I thought I needed to write a book to make it easy for people, because it was so hard for me in the beginning to find the truth and to find out how it all worked and to find out why it mattered, to feed the brain well. So I sat down to write this book, and it took me a long time to write it, because I had to go and search for the information, as I told you, and I had to talk to people, and I had to go and, read through journal articles. And it was a long time in being written, but I wrote it to make it very clear for people to understand. So I divided it into the separate sections that those 7 steps are. The first one is related to exercise and sweat and stress and sex and how that impacts the brain. And then I discuss fats and oils in a lot of detail, and I discuss carbohydrates, and I discuss vitamins and minerals, exactly what each one does in the brain. And I discuss the things that the brain doesn't like food additives, which the brain really doesn't enjoy at all. And then I speak about why people get addicted to certain foods. So I go into a lot of detail in each chapter. And at the end of the book, I give some recipes about how to, use that information. But I think for me, this is what a lot of people have come back to tell me about my book, is that it was really easy to read, and that I took the science and I made it uncomplicated. And that was the aim, so that anybody could read it and understand, why what we eat and how what we eat impacts the brain. Yes. So it was meant to be a simple book, because the science out there can be made much more complicated than the person that has no science background has a need to understand. I didn't want to take people down a whole long complicated path, because most people don't want that. Most people just want to know, okay, this is how it works and this is how I fix it. So that's why the first book, focused completely on that, making it simple. And that's the science. And I tell people that with my second book, I took the science and I took it into the kitchen. Yeah. So I said, okay, this is the science. If you don't want to know the science, you don't have to, but the science is solid, and this is how you use it in your kitchen.
Yes.
And so it's also not about deprivation. I don't tell people, hey, you got to live on kale leaves and carrot sticks. It's not about that. It's about delicious food, because the brain also doesn't want to be deprived. The brain wants to still enjoy food, because we get a lot of sensual satisfaction from the food in our mouth. And that's why it's so easy for processed food to become addicted, because they found out the perfect way to make the mouth feel great. So I make sure that in my book, I do the same thing. The mouth feel is good, but it's all good nutrients. So yes, thank you for asking me about that, because that first book was really a labor of love, because it took a long time and a lot of effort. But when people tell me today how much they enjoy it, I feel that that's a good thing, and I succeeded there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, I was going to do the reviews on Amazon also, and I was like reading amazing reviews about it. I was like, I have to get this book as soon as possible, also for myself to, walk me through the 7 steps, and also, have a better and lighter self also, like to, give my brain the best of the best that it could get through these 7 steps also. So I did like some, from some of the 7 steps you could walk us through, or should we pick up the book and read through the 7 steps ourselves?
I think pick up the book and get the 7 steps and go through it yourself, because it would take me a long time to explain it all. I think what I did in the book, I've got little boxes, if I can call it that. And the publisher worked with me nicely there, because I said, look, let's take the more complex science and put it into the little boxes. And if people don't want to read the more complex science, they can just ignore the little boxes. But people tell me that the little boxes are also helpful. So I think when people buy the book and they start reading it, they'll go, oh, I didn't know that. That's so interesting. Because one of the things that I tried to explain early in the book is that, we can try our best to live a really good life by reading books about self-help and thinking positively and being optimistic and all these different strategies. But I explain to people that if the foundation of your thinking and the foundation of your capacity to be the best you is not well nourished, then all of those different strategies and those different thinking processes that you're trying to implement will never be optimally successful, because it's like trying to push a car uphill. You're really battling against nature. Rather just feed the brain really well and then try all the other things on top of that. And that's really what made me turn away from psychology, because I knew that it would be much harder for a brain that was malnourished to make the changes necessary to live a good life than if the brain was well nourished. So I didn't want to sit down and start trying to help a person think better thoughts and make better decisions when their brain was well nourished. I thought that was going about the story backwards. And when I spoke to my colleagues about that, they were like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But they didn't think about it the same way I did. I just wanted to go to the deeper level.
Yes.
So that's why that first book is important, because we're going to the deeper level. We're going to the place before you try all the other little strategies to feel great. You're going down to the foundation. You're looking at the real, at it from a neuronal perspective. What are the cells doing? Are the cells nourished? Do you have enough of the right nutrients? Because I really don't believe that it's effective to try and tell someone, hey, do this, think this, whatever, when, hey, the brain is battling to function. You're not going to run a long race, if you're not fit. Why would you do that? People would go, hey, there's something wrong with you. Why are you doing that? You have to practice for the race. So my argument is feed the brain really well. And that's basically what the book's about, to lay the foundation so that you can be light and bright. So I can't give that to anybody in our chat. They have to read it and go, oh my goodness, I understand now.
Yeah, I love that. Like going straight down to the fundamental of the fundamentals of everything.
Let's start at first principles, because if you don't, you're kind of like messing around at the top. And so for me, it became a moral issue, Toby, not to be a psychologist. It became a situation where I couldn't stand in integrity and try and teach people a strategy for thinking differently when I understood that I needed to go a step further. So it was an interesting thing for me to make that decision, because I saw colleagues not make that decision, because I couldn't get into their heads to let them see my epiphany. And I had to really turn away from them. And there's only one person that I'm still friends with today out of my whole cohort, because she understood and she thought, Delia's a bit weird, but I still like her. And so she's one of my best friends today. And we often chat about the different paths we took. But, she understands what I'm talking about, and she owns my books, and she practices what I taught her, and she tells her clients about it.
Yeah.
So, she let me go down the path less traveled. Let's put it that way.
Yes. And now you're making impact in the life of thousands and a lot of people all over the world. That's great.
Yeah, I think to me that matters. And I think the people that really get it will be the people that run with it and action it. There's some people that don't want to deal with the fundamentals. There's some people that say, oh no, I like my macros, I don't want to change what I eat. They don't actually understand it. But I think I've come across a lot of people. And recently I got an email from somebody who responded to me being on a summit. And she said to me that for the first time, she feels as if someone can help her, because this person, me, showed her how you need to look at the whole person and that the brain needs to be nourished. So she has tried a lot of different strategies from a lot of different places, and they haven't worked because she hasn't gone to the foundation. So I think for people who have tried a lot of different strategies to feel better, when they get to that point when they realize those haven't worked, they then go, maybe there's a deeper understanding I need. So those are the kind of people I think that gravitate to me, because somehow the light bulb goes off and they go, that makes sense. Like you said, the foundation.
Yes. That's what you just spoke to me already. Like, not only for food or for brain health, like I'm reflecting on that right now. Like for every other part of one's life, one has to always, go down to the roots, to the foundation of everything to be able to, become better or improve, actually. That's one lesson I've learned. Yeah.
That's spot on. And I think in today's world, everybody wants the 2-second solution, the sound bite. They want everything to be simple. I think technology has made it that the brain just looks at a situation and thinks, that's going to take too long. I don't want to bother with that. True. But I think, as we get older and maybe as we get wiser, we realize that the true solutions lie at the foundation. And to get there, you really need to do that. So those were wise words of yours, Toby. Yes, for every part of life.
Wow, thank you so much, Delia. So now I would love us to go to the kitchen with your second book. It's titled Feed Your Brain, the Cookbook. Let us talk about something much more. Yes, so because I love food, actually, and I always want to nourish my body with healthy food. Like as I grow older, I also want to make it much more healthier and much more healthier. And that's why I'm so grateful that I'm speaking with you right now. So your second book is like a collection of quick, easy, and delicious recipes to keep our brain in tip-top shape. And this is, for me, it's very attractive. So is it possible for us to talk about some of these quick recipes? How can I, as a busy person, make some quick, make some quick things together that are very healthy and very important and very, useful for my brain?
Well, the most important thing to do is to make sure that your pantry is well stocked. Okay. Yeah. So when people buy the book, I give them a shopping list, and that shopping list is basically their pantry list. Oh. So they get the pantry list. They just go to my website and get the extra resources, and they get a whole lot of extra things, because you see, the publisher said to me, hey, you've got a page limit. And I was like, oh no, okay, I'll give people extra stuff on online, so they can go online and get that. So that's the important thing, having the pantry list, you see, because once again, it's down to the foundation. You can't walk into your kitchen and make something healthy really quick if you don't have the raw materials. So we need the raw materials. So once you've got them, that's great. And for myself personally, I go to the organic farmers market every week. And I suggest other people find their local farmers market as well, because then you get fresh produce every week from people who really care about what they grow. Yes. And you make sure that you stock your fridge. So I prep my fridge and my kitchen every Sunday. I take a couple of hours and I make sure everything's ready for the week. So I can open the fridge and make a salad in 5 minutes. Take out, toss together, and there it is. But the secret, Toby, the real secret is the sauces and the dressings, because this is something that most people don't know. Flavor molecules disperse in fat much more effectively than they disperse in water. Okay. So when you're trying to enhance the flavor of your food, you need to have some kind of a dressing or some kind of a sauce to go with it, because otherwise you don't have the capacity, your mouth doesn't have the capacity to make the flavor enhanced, because it's with water, not with fat. So I've got a big section in my book for sauces and dressings. And that's the best way to make bestseller dressing. So people say, oh, salads are boring. I go, no, they're never boring, because you just make a different dressing to go with it. You know, garlic, mustard, maple syrup. I've got ones with artichokes in them. I've got ones with sun-dried tomatoes, all sorts of different salad dressings, all nutrient dense as well, that you pour on your salad. So that's the first step, just keeping that in mind. The second step is whatever carbs you use must be whole carbs. They mustn't be refined. So we use, for example, brown rice. I use things like quinoa. I use things like millet. I use things like polenta, you know, the rough ground polenta. Fantastic as the foundation for more veggies and legumes and stews. This last week, for example, we made a coconut bean dish. And this recipe, Toby, is the fastest recipe in the world. You basically take a big container, you throw into it organic tomato pasta sauce, you throw a tin of coconut cream, you drain some beans, and they can be cannellini beans, barlotti beans, kidney beans. You drain them, you toss them in. You take garlic, you chop it up finely. You take an onion, you chop it up finely, and you take cumin and coriander, you know, the ground spice. You throw it in, you stir it all together. You either put it on a pot on the stove and you simmer for about an hour, and then you take the lid off at the end to reduce the sauce a little bit, or otherwise you bake it in the oven if you have to go out. You bake it in the oven at a low temperature and it cooks beautifully. It's got the most magnificent flavor. You can eat it with, you know, corn chips. You can eat it with tortillas. You can eat it with some rice. You can eat it plain with, you know, a nice salad. We normally serve it with guacamole. And everyone goes, wow, this is such a delicious dish, because you've got the coconut cream, which is rich. You've got the beautiful spices. You've got the, you know, the tomato sauce. So that's just an example of a dish you can just throw together literally in 5 minutes, and the end result is delicious. And it's very nutrient dense as well, especially if you chop up some fresh coriander or cilantro into it, and you've got your wonderful guacamole. It's a fantastic meal. So that's the aim of the exercise, to make it quick, simple, delicious. And the leftovers are like refried beans, like the Mexicans eat. And you know, dip that into tortillas and off you go. So that's part of it. And I've got, you know, chocolate ice cream and chocolate sauce and little snacks to make that you can dip into chocolate. And it's there's no deprivation involved at all. It's all yummy and delicious. And a lot of it's got to do with that fat story, that secret about fat and, you know, mouthfeel.
Yes. You know, right now, what's going through my head right now is like my friends listening to this episode later, and they were asking me, Toby, but all of these things, they sound so delicious, so wonderful, but are they cheap to make? Are they affordable to make with all the recipes and everything I mentioned?
Look, that's a good question. And I think that a lot of people have asked me that. And you could obviously make it more expensive by making, you know, adding more creams and more sauces and more oils. So you don't have to do everything that I say. But I do need to say that if you eat this way, it may seem a little bit more expensive to start with, but then you don't have doctor's bills, you know? Then you're not going to buy tablets for an aching pain or, you know, headaches and that kind of thing. So you do definitely win in the long run when you eat this way. But it isn't very expensive to eat this way, because I'm not telling people to go and find grass-fed beef. You know, a lot of it is about legumes and unrefined rice and fresh produce. And if you go to the farmer's market, you get it at a good price, and it doesn't wilt quickly. You know, so you can use all of the food that you buy when you buy it fresh. So there are a few ways to answer that question, but no, it does not have to be more expensive. When you buy the oil that I suggest, like extra virgin olive oil, that's organic oil, it will be a little bit more expensive, but you don't use it on everything, because now you don't fry food anymore. So you save a lot of money on frying food. So it definitely can work out exactly the same, maybe a little bit extra, but I'm prepared to go without something to be able to feed myself really well, because I understand the long-term benefits. So good question, but yes, there are workarounds and they work well.
They work well, yes. I think you're the best person for me to ask this question. Like, I've always been wondering why, you know, some food that we eat, you know, uplifts our mood, makes us very happy. Why does it happen? Like, why do I eat some kind of food? Sometimes chocolate, for example, and afterwards I'm like so happy, so excited. I've forgotten all the worries in the world, and you know, and some minutes ago, before picking up chocolates, I'm like, down and sad and, so filled with so much anxiety and worries. Why does this happen? And what kind of food, cause all of these kind of effects to our brain or body?
Okay, there are two sides to this answer. The first one is that the food may hold some emotional meaning for you. So, when you're a child and your mother made something that you really loved, and that we call that comfort food. So sometimes when people are feeling down in the dumps, then they make that food and they feel better again. And they go, oh, I feel comforted. It takes you back to a simpler time in your life. So that's the psychology of the food. Okay. Just purely from a psychological perspective, we can feel comforted and at ease again. And I think everybody can understand what this means. It's either something that granny made or something that mother made or something that an auntie made. We know that food makes us feel settled. It just takes us back to a time when we felt emotionally good. So that's just the psychology. The neurology of it is really very interesting because we know that some food, specifically very sweet food, releases what we call endogenous opioids. And that is opioids that the body makes itself, which calm us down and make us feel relaxed. And the food that does that is mostly the highly processed food. Okay. And chocolate can fit into that category because chocolate, interestingly, melts at body temperature. So firstly, it's a really sensual experience, a very nice feeling in the mouth. That mouthfeel is very satisfying. Yes. And then the sugar hit helps our blood glucose go up, but it can also make adrenaline go up. And so that's why you can sometimes feel full of energy. Like when you have a coffee, yes. You get that dopamine hit and the dopamine then gets converted into adrenaline. And now you've got energy. You can rule the world and solve every problem. You don't have any trouble. And that's what adrenaline helps you do. It gives you that energy. But so they're kind of like two parts to that. It's the opioid release, which makes people feel relaxed. And then what people learn when they're feeling very stressed is they learn, last time I had that chocolate bar or last time I had that donut, I felt good afterwards. And they don't realize the mechanism, how that happens, that it's actually calming the stress response because of the opioid release, but it becomes a learned habit. So then they do that again. And the more they do it, it becomes a neural pathway. It becomes a habit to do that. But, the second thing is with the adrenaline and the dopamine, that's the energy hit. So it's complex, but it's actually simple when you break it down. You either have the emotional, psychological, which now works with the neurological and the nutritional, because those emotions that come along of feeling safe and satisfied change the neurochemistry in the brain, which now feels calm and better and can cope. So you can see, it's a perfect example of how it's all linked together. We can't separate one thing from the other. We can discuss them separately, Toby, but when we look at them, they become an intimately linked issue.
They're both intertwined, like the emotion and the neurochemistry or neurological parts of it. Yes.
Yeah, it's all intertwined. And so in my book, I actually describe to people how to know if you're addicted to a food. Because sometimes people go, oh, no, I don't have a problem with the food, but they need to eat it every day. And they make an excuse to eat it, and they argue against people who say you shouldn't be eating it. So those are all signs that you become addicted to a food, but for different reasons you become addicted. But the way it acts out in the brain is the same way.
Yes. But are there some things that we can eat or ways that we can eat to prevent, things like dementia or depression or anxiety? Like when we go to that extreme, are there things we could do against that?
Well, we now know that the way we eat does impact the brain directly. And we now also have more research to show that if we eat really well, we can protect our brain from things like dementia. And Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. So we know we can do that because there are a number of reasons this happens. When the brain is deprived of nutrients and it suffers nutrient deficiencies, it can't work optimally because its structure gets impacted. Okay, so we know that. The second thing that happens when we don't eat optimally is that we build up an inflammatory response in the body. And we now know that inflammation under most circumstances causes damage to the body and to the brain. Because the blood-brain barrier that is supposed to be the protection from inflammation in the body gets damaged when we have an inflammatory response in the body, and the body's inflamed, and then it cannot stop the inflammatory compounds from crossing over into the blood-brain, into the brain over that barrier. So that's the second way that happens. The third way that we impact the brain long term is if our blood glucose is often unstable. And that's when we're eating the wrong foods, we're eating them at the wrong time, and they're nutrient deficient. So that means our blood glucose goes up when we eat the wrong food. So we get that blood glucose hit, but then it drops down again when the blood, when the brain runs out of energy, as we discussed, and there's no more energy. And then what the brain does, the brain sends a spike of adrenaline into the body to say, hey, you need to find food. So then you get that adrenaline, which causes its own cascade of damage, but then you find the food, and mostly it's highly processed because you've learned that gives you a quick response. Then the blood glucose goes up again. Okay, but then because it goes up so quickly, it drops again. So what happens is people over a lifetime, they have this up, down, and that unfortunately is one of the reasons that can lead to type 2 diabetes, which is why we call it a lifestyle disease. And we know that people that have type 2 diabetes have a 50% greater chance of getting Alzheimer's. So we know that it's a direct result of that blood glucose up and down, the constant adrenaline hit, and we now know from a lack of the correct nutrients to keep the blood glucose stable and keep the brain structure and functional optimal. So, these are all these different mechanisms that work towards the Alzheimer's dementia situation, but also with depression, because when people's blood glucose is up, down all the time, their moods become unstable. And so that adrenaline spike also causes, over a long period of time, more cortisol to be released in the body, which increases the inflammation in the body. And when your inflammation is high, there's a greater chance, we now understand, for depression to set in. And, depression, unfortunately, once you've had one bout of depression, it's much easier to have the next bout and the next bout, because you're building a neural pathway for that response to the circumstance you find yourself in. So once again, it's the neurology, and it's the nutrition and the psychology is coming to play. So the aim of the exercise is to make sure that we keep our blood glucose as stable as possible by eating the right kinds of food, because then we limit the chances of blood glucose going up and down and emotional dysregulation in the brain. So that's a little bit of a complex answer, but it all boils down to making sure that our diet is very nutrient dense, which helps support stable blood glucose and energy and weight and, cognitive functioning. It just, the foundation, everything builds on top of that.
Yes. Well, as research got into an extent in which when it's already having that dementia, for example, or anxiety or depression, that one could find some food or ways to eat some food in order to get out of this dementia. Has it gotten to that extent yet, or science is not up to that point yet?
No, there are researchers that have looked at that, and there are some very good case studies of people who have dementia, not very far progressed, but definitely have cognitive decline, who start eating well and start doing the things that you need to do, because it's about eating and about body movement. And when they start doing those things, they then definitely have improvements with cognitive functioning. So we know that that is possible, Toby. We don't know if it's possible across the board, if that can happen for all people, but we know that definitely for some people, improvements in those areas can lead to cognitive improvement. The problem with the brain is, and this is kind of like bad news for people, but it's also good news if you get this early on. Because the brain is so sensitive and so sophisticated, when people's cognitive functioning starts declining, the brain starts finding ways to work around those places that aren't working really well anymore. Because it's so clever and it's so sophisticated, it says to itself, okay, that part isn't working really well anymore. I'm going to find a workaround. And so then it finds a workaround, and then that works, and the person doesn't really notice that they're not themselves anymore, that they're not functioning as well anymore. And then another part starts not working very well, and then the brain finds a workaround. So we now know that it can take over 20 years for this to be happening under the surface, for people not to really notice. before they notice the big things, where they can't remember where they parked their car, or they just don't know what's happening in their day, or their memory, it gets so bad that it becomes noticeable to them and to other people. We now know it takes 20 to 25 years for that to be happening under the surface before they go, something's very bad. And that's just because of the sophistication of the brain, because it's working under this consciousness all the time to find a way around the problem. So this is really a case of needing prevention. Absolutely. We have to work on a prevention so that we don't have the situation happening under the covers. As far as depression goes, we know that movement is very, very important for people that are suffering from mood disorders. So exercise is extremely important. The problem, of course, people say to me is that when you're depressed, you don't feel like moving. And that's a challenge. And then you also don't feel like eating the right kinds of food. So you really have to have someone kind of like on your case that's helping you. And I suggest that to people if they're really battling with depression, they call a friend or get someone involved in how they're functioning, because that person needs to be there to remind you to do the things that are good for you when you're suffering from anxiety and from depression. And of course, we have to look at the things that are causing that, because people don't just wake up one day and suddenly say, hey, I'm anxious and depressed. It's a slow road downwards to get to the point where you really feel like life is just too much. And because of that, we need to also be acting in a preventative way. So obviously looking after our diet gives our brain a good foundation, that we find it's less likely for a person to get terribly depressed when their diet is really good, unless their circumstances are extraordinarily bad. And that's why when you work with people, you have to look at all these different aspects. You can't just look at one. So I hope that answered your question. It's a really good question. We now know we can help people reverse some aspects of cognitive decline. And we know that diet is definitely implicated in mood, but it's not the only thing that's implicated.
Yes.
So, any listeners that are listening to this conversation just need to keep that in mind. That, anything that goes on in the brain is a pretty complex thing. It's not a tick one box and we solve the solution. We know that it's a lot more complex, and we have to look at a number of different factors to be able to get someone feeling good again. And it is possible, absolutely. We cannot remove the past and we cannot take away what's happened, but we definitely can step forward with new knowledge and apply that knowledge wisely.
Wow, that's a brilliant answer. And it gives hope to also people that are going through this this phase of life, or this sickness or illness, and just knowing that once they can change their nutrition, they could improve a little bit in their dementia or depression or anxiety.
Absolutely. And look, as I said before, prevention is definitely the much better option. But, human beings often don't think about prevention. They think about, cure. Yes. And society has trained us to think about cure much more than think about prevention. So anyone that's listening to this podcast and has got this far is the kind of person that's saying to themselves, hey, I think prevention is a good idea, because they wouldn't be listening to this conversation if they didn't feel that way. So I say to them, congratulations, you're on the right path.
Yeah. We've been speaking for I don't know how many minutes right now, but it has been a long conversation already, and I still have a lot of questions to ask. I don't know if you still have time.
Yes. Ask away, Toby, with pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'd love to know the benefits of plant-based diet. Like earlier, you were talking about getting the protein maybe from from the grass-fed cows, for example, but it has been proven from from regions and from lots of cultures that deal only with plant-based diets, and they get the amount of proteins that they need. So what are the benefits of just focusing on plant-based diets?
Well, one of the benefits of focusing on a plant-based diet is that you get a lot of fiber. And we know that fiber is very important for the gut, because when you have enough fiber, you get a proliferation of the good bacteria, and the good bacteria keep everything in the gut balanced. And one of the important things the good bacteria do, they make sure that the gut lining is intact. And that means that nothing gets into the bloodstream that causes an inflammatory response. And that's very important. So the gut is a very important thing to keep functioning well. And plant-based diet gives you a lot of the nutrients and fiber to be able to do that. The other thing about a plant-based diet is that you don't put on weight with a plant-based diet if you're eating it properly, because you get satisfied quickly. You don't have to keep on eating, because satiation after about 20-25 minutes, your brain says, hey, I'm full now. And then you stop eating. So you don't end up carrying your energy, as we spoke about earlier. So that's another one of the benefits. The other benefit is there's a lot of nutrients in plants, a lot of nutrients, which we call phytonutrients. And many of them, we don't know what they do. We just know that they do good things. We haven't discovered every single phytonutrient and every single thing it does. So that gives us a wide variety of antioxidants, which we need for a busy brain. It gives us a lot of antioxidants that are fat soluble, things like vitamin A, which is actually beta carotene, which we get things from things like carrots and things like pumpkin, for example. We get vitamin E, which is another fat soluble antioxidant. So it's great for the brain, from nuts and seeds. And then we get a lot of the B vitamins from the good carbs and the legumes. And then we get minerals as well, like zinc and magnesium from a lot of those plants as well. So those are some of the advantages. The problem is that some people will still have deficiencies in things like iron, because the kind of iron that we get in plant-based diets is not the kind of iron that is as easily absorbed by the body as iron from animal products. So that's the one disadvantage. The other disadvantage is that if you're a very active person, you may have to eat more regularly, because you will digest the plant-based food that you're eating a lot faster than you will some of the animal products. So that's something else to keep in mind. And once again, this boils down to personal preference, the age that you are, your activity level. Yeah. So I suggest to people, if they're not feeling wonderful, they need to have their bloods done, because if they're deficient in iron, it could be because they're not getting enough iron from the plant-based diet they're eating, and they may need to wisely incorporate some animal products. And I always suggest that they're organic, because pesticides accumulate in fat and they accumulate going up the food chain. So if you eat animals that are not organic, you're getting a concentration of pesticides, which are very bad for the brain. So rather have a little bit less meat, but make sure that it's organic and use it all. So those are some of the answers in relation to plant-based and animal-based. And I know that when people start speaking about this, they get a kind of like religious fervor. The paleo people believe that's the only way to be. And the plant-based vegan people believe that's the only way to be. But the research tells us that the best diet for the brain is based on the Mediterranean diet, which includes good fats. It includes some animal products. It includes a lot of plant-based products and all unrefined. And the blue zone areas in the world where people are long-lived also have that kind of a diet, where there's not 100% focus on only one kind of food. It's a focus on a broad variety of food, most of it from plants and some of it from animals, but wisely chosen. So it's, when I speak to people that are either one or the other, and they're very firm on that, I just bring the science back to what we know. And the science tells us that we need a much more balanced approach in regards to how we feed the brain and the body. And going one way, like a zealot, is not a solution. We need to make sure how we feel. We need to think about long-reaching effects of a diet that is deficient in something. We need to have a look at our blood work to make sure what we're deficient in, that we rectify that. And sometimes, I say to people who don't want to touch an animal, but they feel terrible, they feel ill, they can't get better. And I say to them, look, you can't live your full purpose in the world if you're feeling sick. So you can't be trying to fight for whatever you're fighting for and what you believe in if your body and your brain isn't functioning optimally. So sometimes we have to give up something for a bigger goal. So I say to people, a little bit of red meat from an animal that has been treated well, that hasn't been kept in a cage, that hasn't been treated badly, and that hasn't been pumped full of antibiotics and pesticides, it's going to do you some good, and that animal's life won't have been to waste. So it's a very complex conversation, and people get very emotional about this issue. But, we have a body that needs certain nutrients, and some people can be fine on a plant-based and some people can't. And some people want to be on an animal-based product or, lifestyle choice, but they actually aren't doing well on that either, even though someone's told them that paleo is the solution or keto is the solution or whatever. And they need to look on the other side. I think people need to be very open-minded about this conversation, because science tells us that the middle road is definitely the better option.
Yes. Wow. So we have to have like a mixture of everything in healthy balance. Yes,
absolutely. And see how we feel about that, because some people need more of some nutrient than other people. And that could be to do with their childhood. It could be to do with their genes. There are a number of different situations. In my book, I speak about a specific gene called the MTHFR gene, which means that people have to take a supplement to get folate. They can't rely on folate, which we used to call vitamin B9. They can't rely on just getting folate from their food, because their body doesn't convert that folate into the active form that they need. So that's another, conversation that people may have to have. And I often send people off for a test to see if they've got that gene, because if they've got that gene, they're predisposed to feeling depressed. They're predisposed to a number of other health issues. So we need to get them onto an active form of folate so that they can counteract that nutrient deficiency. But those are conversations that you have deeper into, the quest for why you're not feeling good and you think you're doing everything right.
Yes. Oh, wow. So one can always come over to you to, ask all of these questions, to know what to eat in order to feel better and what not to eat in order to, feel better also.
Absolutely. I mean, people can drop me a line and ask me a question, because I find that when people have followed a particular dietary approach for a number of years and they're still not feeling good, they'll send me a message and they'll say, I think I'm doing the right thing. What am I doing wrong? And I'll just reply and I'll say, well, go and read this page in my book, or go and read this blog post or whatever, and go and see, what the truth is. Because mostly when people get to the stage where they're feeling really bad and they think they're doing everything right, they're then open to change. It's when they, in the stage of thinking that they know everything, that they're not at the stage where they are open to saying, hey, maybe I don't know everything.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. So now I'd love to switch a little bit to neuro and physiology. Like,
okay.
I would love you to tell me, to a layman, what is neurophysiology and how can we be neurophysiologically robust?
Okay, good question, Toby. You're asking a lot of good questions, but they're complicated. Okay, the first thing, our neurophysiology is basically about everything that goes into making our central nervous system work well. And this is not just between our ears. Our neurophysiology has got to do with our brain, our spine, how our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system works, and our vagus nerve. So it's about all of these things combined. So it's about putting it all together as a whole and maximizing its capacity. So that's what I mentioned when I spoke earlier about movement. We know that the brain needs us to move as much as the body needs us to move. People used to think, we just move and we exercise for our body to stay healthy and strong, but that's not so. We move so that our brain can function well too, because every single time we move, whatever we do with our body, whatever it is that we're doing, we are sending messages to the brain by that movement. And blood is moving to the parts of the brain that is coordinating all this physical movement. So we cannot separate these two things. And so one of the things that I say to people is being flexible is very important, because when you're flexible, that means that all the blood vessels moving into your spine and all your muscles help keep that blood flow going between your body and your brain. As far as the vagus nerve goes, the vagus nerve is wandering through all our organs, and vagus is actually the Latin word for wandering. So this is exactly what the vagus nerve does. It wanders through all our organs, and people can understand, if you have butterflies in your stomach or your stomach feels tense, that's because the vagus nerve is picking up that you're feeling distressed or nervous or anxious about something, and it's referring it to the brain. And the brain is going, I'm feeling anxious and nervous. So it's like this two-way conversation. But the interesting thing is that 80% of the conversation is from the vagus nerve to the brain, and only 20% is from the brain down into the body. So that has told us a very important thing, that what's going on in the body and how the vagus nerve picks it up seems to be more important than what the brain is telling the organs. And that kind of like turned things on its head for a lot of people. They go, oh my goodness, I thought the brain was the one directing everything. No, this is a two-way street, and what's going on in the body is constantly feeding up into the brain. So the movement of the body and the flexibility of the spine and the capacity to be energetic and move forward in the world combines beautifully with what the brain's direction is and how it can stay healthy. So that's a short rundown about our neurophysiology. We cannot separate the two. We have to keep our body moving and keep our brain in action as well, because the combination of those two is the foundation of our neurophysiology. So when you find people that live in their heads all the time and they ignore their body, they will never maximize cognitive functioning and optimize what their brain can actually accomplish if they don't get their body involved as well. They think that it's okay just to be in the head, but they're biased just in the head. We need the body to be moving as well, because moving through the world gives our brain an enormous amount of information that keeps the brain in good shape. So doing exercise, for example, where you balanced, and that's one of the reasons I like yoga, because in yoga, they make sure that you can stand on one leg, and standing on one leg is really good for the brain. The two sides of the brain speak to each other when you're standing on one leg, and that keeps the blood supply going. It keeps the connection good. So that's very short summary on neurophysiology.
Yes. And how can we, shift our mindset and be positive when our neurophysiology is healthy or at the optimal states that we need it to be?
Well, it's much easier to feel optimistic and feel positive when your physiology is working well. And one of the examples I give to people, when you're outside and you're exercising, when you're going for a walk, you cannot look down all the time. You look up at the horizon. And in doing so, you're looking at the future. When people are depressed and they're anxious, they look down, they're inward all the time. Their whole body, and you can look at them from a physical perspective and you can see they're pulling in on themselves. They're not looking up at the world and looking around them. When we look up and out, we can focus on the future. We can think about better things. We can be more hopeful. When we're only withdrawn, your body basically mirrors how your mood is. So when you change your body shape, you change your mood too. And there is a person that I worked with who is a very smart man, and he said a mood disorder is actually a lack of movement disorder. So one of the things to get people to do is to start moving more, because when they start moving more, suddenly their mood also improves. And you can speak to anybody, if you come across a person and they're feeling down and they're not feeling good, and you can get them to go out and do some activity, immediately you'll see they start looking a little bit better, because they don't have a choice. They've got to look up. They can't keep on looking down, they'll fall. Their body and their brain knows that. So it forces them to change their perspective. And so they works together beautifully when you can get them working together that way.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for that. Like, mood disorder is movement disorder. Like, yeah. So
it's a good one, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Like, you have to keep on moving your body in order to have good mood. Yes.
You do. And if you're eating really well, then you've got the perfect combination.
Wow. Then life becomes, lighter and brighter. And
Absolutely, Toby. You've said it perfectly. Thank you.
Yes. So I think it's quite important for us to talk about your research into female stress. This has been published in a number of peer-reviewed journals and magazines. Can you educate me on the stress female brain and stress resilience versus management? This is very important because as a male, I have females in my life, and my mom, my girlfriend, and everybody, female friends all around, and I want to really understand, the female brain and everything about stress.
Excellent. Look, it's a good question, but once again, it's a little bit complicated, but I'll make it simple. The first thing is that women today live in a very complex society. Our world is complex, and so women spend a lot of time juggling. They work, they've got children, they've often got parents that they're helping to look after, they're involved in the community, and they're also expected to always look good. So we have all these different things that we're juggling as women. Men also have to juggle some things, but not as much as women, because we're always the primary caretaker of the child, or in most cases, child or children. And we also do more of the domestic tasks. And this has been, a trend. We've done research across this many decades. We know that that hasn't changed. So that's the first thing we call the psychosocial stress. This is in that environment, The second thing that's important is that women have regular hormonal shifts. Men have testosterone that over a lifetime tapers off slowly. But women have reproductive hormones during their reproductive years that fluctuate every single month. And that is estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen is linked to serotonin, and progesterone is linked to GABA. Serotonin is involved in things like appetite regulation, helping us go to sleep, helping us feel safe and secure, helping us feel settled. So when estrogen fluctuates, so does serotonin, impacting all of those factors. When progesterone fluctuates, so does GABA. And GABA is short for gamma-aminobutyric acid. And GABA is involved with also helping us feel calm, helping us feel settled, helping us feel as if we can cope with everything. We feel like we can manage. So obviously, when progesterone fluctuates, so do all the things related to GABA. When women are very stressed, estrogen and progesterone fluctuates in a way that impacts serotonin and GABA really negatively. And so women find themselves feeling more emotional. They feel more moody. They want to eat a whole box of chocolates plus another one. They're cranky. They feel like they're not okay. They don't feel settled. They get aggressive and irritable. And that is the challenge with the stressed female brain in relation to hormones. The third thing to keep in mind is that the stressed female brain experiences stress in a different way, because what happens is that the limbic system in the female brain, that's the emotional center, is more interconnected than in the male brain. So the female brain is more emotional, if I can put it in layman's terms. So a woman will get more upset about something that they perceive as being unfair, or they'll get distressed about something that they see that they just feel emotional about things more regularly than men do. They also think about things for a lot longer than men do. So a woman will have a problem and she'll think about this maybe for a week, and she'll mention it to the male in her life, and he'll go, oh, well, this is how you fix it. Then in 2 weeks' time, she'll mention it again, and he'll go, but isn't it finished? Haven't you solved it? And she'll go, no, because I thought about this, and I thought about that, and I thought about that repercussion, So men find it hard to understand why women can what we call ruminate about something. We can think about something for months and not find a solution, whereas the male has moved on and doesn't even remember the thing anymore. And that's just because our limbic system is very much more interconnected versus the male limbic system. The challenge is that the hormones work with the limbic system. So now we have an interaction with hormones that are fluctuating and a very much more emotional limbic system, which is why at certain times of the month, women will get more emotional. They'll get, more irritable. They'll feel upset. They'll be very sensitive and take everything personally. It's because their tightly connected limbic system is now working with these hormones that are fluctuating and leaving them feeling vulnerable or irritable or frustrated or whatever it is because of this interconnection. So when men understand this, it makes it much easier for women, because instead of saying, oh, you're just hormonal, he can think to himself, hold on a second, this is her brain, her beautiful, unique brain working in this way at this time. And I don't have to get, cranky with her. I just have to understand this is a neurobiological and neurochemical reaction that's happening in her brain. And it's not going to be forever. It's just going to be at this time. So those are the three things: the psychosocial, the limbic system being heightened, heightened connectivity, and the hormones. But there is one more, and this relates to childhood. Women that have had a challenging childhood where they have felt unsafe physically or emotionally, they can grow up and be more stress sensitive than women that didn't have that experience. So when I work with women, I find out what their childhood was like. Because if their childhood was very stressed and they felt physically or emotionally in danger, then the brain makes changes. And those changes last across a lifetime. And we call what happens in the situation adverse childhood events, which lead to limbic sensitivity. So now if they've had a challenging childhood, Toby, what happens is that their hormones will likely also impact their limbic system, but their limbic system got sensitized to the childhood stress. And so that's the lens they look at the world with now. The world doesn't really seem like a safe place. And it's not that they think this consciously. It's that their brain registered it at a state when the brain was busy developing. And because it registered it at that stage, the brain will always think, I have to keep you safe because maybe that bad situation will come back. Maybe you will always be unsafe. And so the brain registers it in that way. So those are the 4 ways that the female brain is different to the male brain, and the way it responds to the environment it finds its way, it finds itself in. It is a very interesting subject, and my PhD was very fascinating because when I uncovered many of these things, I was really blown away to a large degree because very few people understand this. And so they don't make allowances for how the female brain is different to the male brain. And it's not that the male brain doesn't get stressed, don't get me wrong. And it's not that the male brain doesn't also suffer. It's just that the way it happens with the female brain, and having a female brain, I can speak to this, it's different. And it's hard to explain it to a male. So I'm always excited when I can explain it to a man like you, because now you take this knowledge forward and it makes your life easier. And the woman in your life will have an easier time because now you will understand. So it's a beautiful ripple effect. And I hope you see it that way too.
Yes, now I can understand my female friends better, and the women in my life better when they behave in some ways, or when things go, when the interaction or the behavior is quite different, or expectation is quite different from then I understand from your explanation already what's happening or what's going on.
It's very helpful. And I think when women and men can work together and collaborate and cooperate, we'll have a world that works a lot better. Instead of saying, oh, well, we're all supposed to be the same and we all have to respond the same way. It doesn't work. It's much better to say, hey, you've got strengths that I'm not great at, and some of my weaknesses you can support me with. It works a whole lot better when we work together. And there is research to show, for example, in companies where men and women work together as a cohesive whole, that the companies do better. The companies are financially more well off than when they don't work together. So there's a lot of argument, family peace and company success all hinges on whether we can just get that balance perfectly right.
Yes. Wow. So can you educate me a little bit on stress resilience also? And why does stress make us fat? And what can we do about this?
This is a good question. And I think that I realized, when COVID came, we used to speak about stress management a lot. And I think that stress management is an old-fashioned term now, because I think if anything, COVID taught us that we can never know what's coming around the corner. And I think that that's why we need to become stress resilient. We need to actually step up and become capable of coping with whatever comes our way. We can't just say, oh, well, we're going to manage this thing, because we don't know what the next thing is coming. Just by definition, when we speak about management, we understand that we know what we're dealing with. So that's how we can manage it. I don't think we have that luxury anymore in the modern world. I think we need to be able to cope with whatever is coming. And that's why I look at stress resilience as more important. When you become stress resilient, you step up, and you have to look after your neurophysiology to be able to do that. But you also have to have a different psychological mindset. You have to say to yourself, I don't know when a situation is going to end. It's pretty bad, but I have to stay positive and optimistic realistically. You can't say to yourself, okay, December 1, it's all over and I can go back to normal. There is no going back to normal, which is why we have to look at making sure that we are as physically and mentally strong as possible, which I term resilient, so that whatever comes, we can cope with it. And when I speak to people today, I found that many of them don't understand that concept because they keep on saying to me, but when things go back to normal, and I say, how do we know it's ever going to be normal? We have to be able to cope in a world where that isn't the case, because what people are wanting to do, they're wanting to go back to comfort.
Yes.
And they're wanting to go back to what we know and going back to how it used to be. I don't think that's possible. I think as human beings, we really have to step up. And so that's why I use that term, Toby, stress resiliency, and also why I speak about the neurophysiology, how we have to be proactive here. We can't be sitting and waiting for anybody else to make it right for us.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. I think we've seen that very clearly. We have to make ourselves capable of coping, regardless of what happens. So that's the short answer.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I mean, we've spoken in length already about different things, like about the brain health, the food that we need for that. We've talked about your books. We talk about physiology. We talk about stress. We talk about the female brain also. A lot of topics that we've covered already in this episode. But I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who would love to still connect with you, work with you, maybe ask some more questions that we're not able to cover in this episode. So what's the best way to work with you or connect with you?
People can find me at my website, which is www.lby.life, which stands for lighter, brighter, you.life. They can find me on Instagram. I'm not very active there. I kind of like keep it as a place where I store things. So they can find me there. They can also find me on my author page on Facebook. And I put up posts there, and I put up interesting articles as well. And people can always send me an email, Toby. They'll find an email on my website. And if they want to work with me, they can go to my contact page and they can see how they can work with me there as well. So because of technology, I can work with people anywhere in the world. Hopefully not always at midnight, like with you. But yes, technology has allowed me to do that with people. So there are a number of ways that people can find me. And I suggest that, as you said, if people have a question that I didn't answer or they want more detail about that, they just need to send me an email and I'll happily reply.
That's awesome. So I'm going to place all of your information in the show notes for this episode. And I encourage everyone to just copy the one that is appropriate or the one that's suitable and get across to you to work with you, connect with you, buy your books, and maybe also download the extra resources from your website. Also, that's very important.
Absolutely, yes. Those go with the book. And so those are the information that I couldn't put in the book because the publisher said, no, limit, no more. And I said, oh, no, I want more. So I put it in the extra resources. But my opt-in gift is a very good place to start because people can get to understand me a little bit more there. They can see the recipes and the food, and then they can get a feeling for how I share information.
Yes, that's awesome. That's great. I want to say thank you so much for everything I've been able to learn from you today. I feel like just going on and on, asking you more questions and more questions, but you've given me more than enough to, to reflect on, to go back and sit back and, improve my life on the way I eat, the way I see things and people, and, the way I, relate with the females in my life, for example, also, and do I deal with stress also. That's a lot of things I've taken from this episode for myself. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Toby,
it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. It's lovely to talk to someone who's so curious and who wants to know more and who wants to apply that knowledge. And it's a very good word that you used, reflection. If people can listen to this podcast and they can reflect on it, because sometimes we need to sit with some information and some truth before we act on it. But then when you act on it, I want to tell people that they will make a difference for their whole life. Yes. This isn't a quick fix. This isn't a 1, 2, 3 step. It's a process where you actually transform your life and live the best life possible, because I have not found a better way to do it than to start at the foundation. So thank you for the opportunity to do this and have this chat with you. It's been a delight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey there, podcast enthusiasts. Are you ready to add a little sparkle to your day? If you're loving the insightful conversations and captivating stories on Mirror Talk Podcast, here's a friendly nudge to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on the empowering messages and thought-provoking discussions we bring to your ears. But wait, there's more. We're all about spreading positivity and inspiration, and you can be a part of it too. How? By sharing the love with your friends and family. Share this episode with your loved ones, and let's create a ripple effect of empowerment and growth together. And hey, if you've been enjoying what you hear, why not take a moment to leave us a glowing 5-star review? Your feedback fuels our passion to keep delivering content that resonates with you. So hit that subscribe button, share the love, and leave us a review. Let's keep the conversation going and spread the Mirror Talk magic far and wide. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, your support means the world to us.